Good morning. My name is Dr. Cheryl Lentz. I am an adjunct faculty and on the editing staff for Capella University. And the connection I have to leading in a remote environment is the fact that I've been a 20-year college professor and started my career actually in a virtual environment when all we had at the beginning was a virtual email address and a videotape. And that's what we call distance education. I'm a former military wife and started my teaching career in Japan. And when we transferred back stateside, I wanted to have the ability to continue this conversation with the university I started, and that's where digital and distance education started to come into be. And now it is where we are today, that I can talk to you remotely to have these opportunities with students of mine all over the world. I use a variety of teaching techniques, and I want to be able to talk to you about those because leading in a remote workplace isn't so different than the fundamentals for leadership that we've talked with Bass and Maxwell and Godin and all of these giants that are in their business fundamentals and communication fundamentals and teaching fundamentals have been the same since Malcolm Knowles in the 1950s. The question isn't the what, the question is the how. And so the idea is when I teach a class, for example, I teach in about 4 or 5 different hybrids. I will teach the same class differently than if I'm in the classroom, if I'm a hybrid, a little bit in the classroom, a little bit online, or a completely online class. Because the secret is about community and connecting the learner or the employee in the workplace. Why? I've been working remotely, goodness, probably about 12 years now. And the challenge has always been the isolation, the same things that students in the distance education or in the online environment experience, particularly at the doctoral level. I am a doctoral mentor as well. And the challenge is they always feel that they're the only ones. And a remote employee also has the same concerns that they're the only one. Because when you're in a at-home environment, a remote location, you're not connected via a touch point, a physicality if you can watch someone at the water cooler and be able to connect with them and have an interaction. Most of my interactions are via what we're talking about today is we're having this idea of having a digital video relationship where you're getting to know me, but it's a one-way dialogue. And so the challenges are how do we create that in-person connection, that ability to still maintain the workplace, still maintain professionalism, but still use the business fundamentals that we learned in communication. Communication is nothing more than a sender and receiver. And somehow something supposedly changes when that sender and receiver are now in a virtual environment that may not be synchronous, meaning it's not real time. Now, sometimes I will connect with students and clients and faculty and colleagues all over the world real time, whether it's Adobe Connect, whether it's WebCT, whether it's Skype, whatever the version is, and there's something magical that happens that is we can get close together to have that real world conversation. Why? Things happen in the digital world that we don't have the nonverbals to be able to offer that connection because somebody will say something and then somebody will say something. And the words on a page can't necessarily convey some of those little nuances. And so leading in a remote workplace has to be able to capture all of those things that we would normally have and struggle with in-person conversations. So here are some of the things that I've done specifically for students that I've borrowed from the business world. And now I go back and forth because the concepts and the business fundamentals, they're the same. And I call it, it's a book I published years ago. I've been published 43 times. This book was really early in my career, and I call it Technology That Tutors. We live in a remote workplace that we need to be able to understand that any type of tool in our toolkit, any type of communication that we use has its appropriate design, if you will. For example, when I teach in my business comm class, we're looking at the ideas, email is amazing, but it's not appropriate all the time for a remote workplace. I'll give you an example. A few months ago, a company that I was doing some work for a very long time, instead of getting me on the telephone and letting me know, and I was expecting that technology had changed their work model. Things have been adjusting because of now having a bit more of a remote site, that some of the things that I had been previously doing for them was no longer needed. And I expected that. What I didn't expect was the how. I received an email saying, I'm sorry, but your services are not required any longer. We're moving in another direction. And I looked at them going, it wasn't the outcome that I was upset with. It's the how. And many of our students, many of our colleagues, many of our clients, they don't object to the what. We understand digital technology changes things. We understand the remote workplace is different. I can connect with people all over the world. I've had some days where I've had clients in South Africa and Australia and students here in the United States. And I've talked to all of them in the span of 8 hours. And it is just amazing what technology can do. The challenge becomes is how. And any tool we have in our toolkit has an appropriate use. Malcolm Knowles knows from back in the 1950s is the adult learner in particular, they just need to know why and they need to know how. And we as the sender and the receiver need to make sure that our messages are conveyed to them so they understood them and understand them in the ways that we hope to and what we wanted to tell them. Because there's nothing worse than having someone think they communicated something only to have the receiver have a completely different interpretation and a different call to action. And this communication and this confusion often results in misunderstanding, particularly in the remote workplace. A boss assumes after having a either in-person conversation, an email, whatever the method was, that this is what they communicated. And they assumed that this is what they would get back, and they didn't. And then suddenly there's a lot of friction that's coming behind. So the fundamentals and clarity of communication, clarity of sender-receiver, is simply the ability to, how do we do this with new technology? I'll give you a couple of examples. Back in January of 2011, I was really frustrated with having then taught, it would have been almost more than 10 years at the time, that it was how do I convey to my students when I've been teaching the same things for the last 10 years, that I have to remember as an instructor, as a colleague for clients, that I may have said this 1,000 times, 10,000 times. This may be the first time they've heard it. So for the first time, when I created, again, my book called The Technology That Tutors, it's the ability to show how to use technology. And in this case, I started a YouTube channel so that I, just like you and I are doing today, could have this conversation, this connection with my students on a one-on-one basis, but not necessarily be they're live. Think of an idea called evergreen. In the marketing world is when things haven't changed. For example, until the new APA manual comes out sometime in October or so of this year, 6th version and the ways we teach it and what it is are pretty much the same. So anytime that I'm going to offer a video to my students or my clients or my colleagues, it's going to remain the same. And it's going to be the same page number, the same concept. But now I can have a 2 to 3 minute video that I will share with my students. I will put it on my YouTube channel that I can use over and over again. And in that initial video, just like today, I can get excited. I can get thrilled about passive voice and thrilled about anthropomorphisms and thrilled about remote locations for that one time. And that enthusiasm gets channeled into the YouTube so that when you're receiving it, hopefully you realize I'm talking directly to you. I'm giving you the ability that, yes, I'm a live person. I'm a live faculty. I'm a live colleague. I'm a live employee. I'm a live boss. And I want to convey something to you. And this might be the most effective way to do so. I also, knowing the 3 or 5, depending on what you subscribe to, learning methods that we have, auditory, kinesthetic, visual, and there are the other 2 depending on if you subscribe to that research. But the idea is, if you learn via visual, this video is going to be wonderful. And I have my students there, I have over 100 teaching videos on little things, anywhere from time management to how to process your dissertation, to how to write it, to how to manage it, how to synthesize it. I mean, all kinds of little tidbits. 2 to 5 minutes. Some of them are a little longer depending on the content. But it's the ability that all I have to do is have this YouTube channel. I put it in my class or I send it to my employees. And I've done this in separate consulting assignments that I would have a channel just for them. And then they can go back and see me. Personal, physical, all my non-verbals. And I'm overemphasizing some of the gestures to make a point. So that you can have the ability to communicate me. I'm a real person. It's just we're distant and I may not necessarily have the ability to be in person in a synchronous live one-on-one chat, but I can still convey the same information. My bubbly personality comes through nonetheless. And now I have the ability to scale my time. So it doesn't matter where my clients or my students or my colleagues are around the world in a remote location, we can still connect. We can still communicate. I used to teach my students years ago how to correctly use voicemail. It would be annoying when somebody would say, "Hi, this is so-and-so, call me." We didn't have a communication event that happened there. If, however, you were able to use that remote tool as voicemail. Hi, this is Dr. Cheryl Lentz. I'm sorry you're not available, but your message of August 15th indicated that you needed this from me. Here is the answer to this. Please find it in your email. I look forward to, if you have any questions, please contact me. Here's my phone number. Thanks so much. Have a nice day. End conversation. See the difference in those types of interactions? Same medium, same cell phone, but a different way of using it. No different than this video is trying to convey a call to action, an understanding of how do you lead in a remote location. The same way that you're going to lead the business fundamentals of leadership. And there's 65 different kinds of leadership that are available, and each one of them has their most appropriate tool. And one of my favorite sayings is, think about Abraham Maslow. And he said, you know what? If everything looks like a nail, if all you have is a hammer, everything coincidentally looks like a nail. And think about the idea of communication. You don't want to buy a hammer. You don't want to own a hammer. That was never the goal. You want the nail on the wall because you want the picture on the wall. So the end goal is really the picture on the wall, and the hammer is the tool to get there. Now, how many of us have used our shoe or something hard like a mouse or something that we had at our disposal because we couldn't find the hammer? The end result that it still facilitated the outcome of getting the nail on the wall so we can put the picture on the hook. That's all we're doing with communication. And leading in a remote workplace is looking at how do you use the available tools for the most effective outcome with the design they have. In my example about being able to have a relationship in business dismissed as a matter of email was really inappropriate and unprofessional and a coward's way out, because it's so much easier to have a one-way conversation. Thank you so very much. I don't want to deal with conflict management, but I'm going to tell you your services are no longer numbered, and then you sign your name. And it was very disappointing. And I followed it up with a phone call. Unfortunately, they didn't respond. And it was really disappointing. Again, not the what that we do, but the how we do. When you have somebody that's been a long time relationship, do you really want to be able to text them their father died? Do you really want to give them an email that says they've been dismissed or their contracts are not being renewed or whatever that case may be? These are the lessons we need to use, that the fundamentals are still the same. It's still the how. We're still avoiding conflict resolution and conflict management. Why? We don't want to have controversies with people. It's so much easier to just send them an email and then pretend they don't exist because you've accomplished your job. You've accomplished your mission. I had to end that relationship. Really? Is that the reputation that you want to have? Remote location is all about creating those relationships. And if we don't use the most appropriate tool for the most appropriate outcome, you're going to get some really interesting things that are going to happen. And we look at the simple things. That's why I love Seth Godin and all of his books, The Purple Cow and Icarus and some of these things. And it's the only blog that I actually subscribe to, because he has very pithy, very succinct, very aha moments of simple things. And leadership, it's not rocket science. It's common things that aren't common practice. And in the remote location, you really need to be able to have that relationship. And sending someone an email is not the tool if you're mad at them. It's not a conflict resolution tool because it's a text-only medium. You don't get the enthusiasm. You don't get the anger. You don't get the how are we going to do? And it's not something that manages a relationship. So there are certain ways that in a remote location you have to lead your people, and you may have to teach them, like I do my students and my clients, how to use email, how to use their cell phones, how to use texting, how to use emoticons. We don't have classes in that. We just assume people know how to do it, and they do it very poorly, and they do it very badly, and lots of confusion and misunderstandings and things happen. And so when we look at how do we make that relationship happen, a lot of it is answering a simple question. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Just because I can send you an email, does that really mean that that's the most effective way forward? I could send my students emails much the same way that some of them send to me, and they're very rude, and they're very audacious, and they're very bold, and I can guarantee you they would never speak that way to somebody if they were standing in front of you. Never. But somehow this anonymity of this digital remote workplace gives us a bit of I'm entitled to communication, and they don't often realize that how they come across can sever that relationship. I have several students that I'm working with right now because they don't understand how they come across and how unprofessional they are. And yet they wonder to themselves why they aren't getting promoted. I know. So we need to go back to teaching these business etiquette classes. We need to go back to Maslow and look at, do we really want the hammer? No, we want the end result that the hammer gives us. So we have to focus on teaching process. There's an effective way to use text. There's an effective way to use email. There's an effective way to do your cell phones and all kinds of other things we have. Unfortunately, many people take the path of least resistance and they will say, well, I just want it off my plate and I want to have some proof that I did it, so I'm going to send an email. And that might have a CYA factor. Yes, I did my job, but did you do it well? And can you even assume in this digital age that the email was even sent? And timing can sometimes be an amazing opportunity. For example, advice that I once learned is I tend to work very early in the morning. It's just I have a Siberian Husky. She gets me up very early in the morning, and that's my circadian rhythm. But you know what? Not everybody else gets up at 5 in the morning. And I noticed for some of my remote staff that they were we lead by example. And when I was demonstrating that I was up at 5 a.m., duly emailing, sending information, because in my mind, I was trying to check my box, do my checklist to make sure that I was getting everything done for the day. What I didn't realize were the subtext messages for going, it's like, well, gosh, if the leader is up at 5 a.m. and we follow and emulate that which everyone watches everything we do, then I was sending a message that I really didn't intend to send. I didn't intend to say that, hey, since I'm up at 5 in the morning, you need to be up at 5 in the morning. And I slowly saw some shifting in that direction and had to go back and say, hey, guys, we live in an asynchronous environment. You live in the ability that we have certain things that are task-oriented. And as long as you accomplish those tasks in the appropriate time frame, whether you do it at 5 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon is not of concern to me. And I don't want to set the expectation that as I do, you must follow. And so be careful of some of the things because people are going to follow everything we do. That's what leadership is about. And we understand that a 2-year-old will mock sometimes and mimic, but so will the 40-year-old in the office. Because there's that idea of moral relativism, is that we in charge set the rules, and we may not even know that our behavior is offering that example, and we need to make sure that that example is worthy of being followed. So sometimes we need to explain what we're doing and why we're doing, particularly when we're not in a live situation such as the remote workplace. So my best advice for you is to really think of that question. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Do we really need to be able to send that message that I'm sending at 5 a.m.? Maybe what I'll do is write those emails because I'm up and just schedule them or send them later. Think about the end result. What is it that we want to have happen? We have SMART goals for a reason, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And for leadership, we have to culminate all that together and realize that we need to be an example worthy of being followed. And sometimes we have to teach these things. We have to teach the appropriate use of email and text and the appropriate use of how to communicate into this. You'll notice I'm not using PowerPoint. Why? Most people do, and what do? They read to you. Unless somebody's bringing me milk and cookies, I tell my students all the time, thou shalt not read to me in PowerPoint. If you're going to send someone a PowerPoint and it has everything you need to say, then why do we need you? The remote location is not a substitute for, but an enhancement of. So we want to be able to use these tools with the most effective outcome. And so I suggest that we teach our students, teach our clients, teach the ability to know when and how to use the tools that we have at our disposal. Because believe it or not, it's the same fundamentals that we have in the in-person world. How do you teach someone conflict resolution? How do you teach them time management? How do you teach them professional behavior, professional dress, professional decorum? I'm intentionally looking at some of these things because you'll notice that I wear glasses. I'm trying very hard so that my reflection of my glasses won't show up on your video. Why? An expert is someone who simply knows the techniques. And I keynote speak all over the world. I just spoke at Zappos in May. And these are things that you want to know that an expert will have the ability that I'm not above you, I'm not below you, I'm just a little ahead of you in the process. And I would hope after 20 years as a professional academician in higher education, as well as a 12-year business owner, I'm actually known as the academic entrepreneur. And that came from a client of mine in Spain years ago when I was trying to describe to him, and I wasn't very articulate at the time. This is very early in my career. And he says, oh, so what you do is you're just an academic entrepreneur, and it's stuck. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I am. And so when we look at this remote location, we simply have to give voice and titles to things we already do. Because isn't this what a faculty does? I help my students see what's already there. I put labels on it. I put new nuances on there. I help them discover them. I teach them how to fish, not give them a fish. And so this is the same fundamentals we've been talking about since the beginning of time, since Knowles, since we can go back, oh my gosh, since Socrates and Plato's. It's simply the idea of learning to connect with another human being, regardless of the environment. Now we've just got cooler tools. I can now reach out and have a conversation with Dr. Lee in South Africa and talk to Eric in Australia 2 hours later. I can talk to my students online. As a matter of fact, we have all kinds of tools to do that. They can call me on a cell phone via office hours. They can schedule time with me when it comes to making a phone call, so we're both in the same place at the same time. We have all kinds of videos that we can do and enhancements and tools. I just conducted a live seminar and some of my students weren't able to make it, just like many of our clients. And so what did we do is we created the video as if they were there. I recalled the information of questions and things that they could ask so that I could address them in a personal format. I wasn't reading to them. I was animated, much like you, as I have a few notes here in the background just to keep me on track, but no PowerPoint, no reading, just this exciting ability to connect with another human being using technology that now I have students all over the world. That wasn't possible in a live video type format only a few years ago. And now it looks as if, I hope you've realized that I'm talking directly to you. And that's an amazing opportunity that we just didn't have. And the last thing I want to do is have yet another boring PowerPoint opportunity to have somebody read and monitor and say, yeah. If they don't remember, you've lost an opportunity to connect with your audience. So hopefully you'll understand is some of these things are the same things you've already learned in school about being able to connect with someone, to smile, to make eye contact, to lower your voice when it's appropriate, to get excited and get animated when it's appropriate, but to always make sure what's the end goal, what's the result. Anytime I do a meeting with a student, I ask them, or a client, I will ask them, create the agenda. Tell us to make sure that we have a 1, 2, 3, usually 2 bullet points if it's a half an hour, maybe 3 to 5 if it's an hour, never more than an hour. You've got to know people's attention span. An hour in a meeting, goodness, I used to cancel meetings all the time to the chagrin of my bosses, and I would ask them, what's the point of the meeting? If we don't have a purpose, then we don't need a meeting. I'm always about efficiency. I'm always about what's the most effective tool for the most effective outcome. I have a series I talk to my students about, and clients, again, I borrowed all this from the business world. Think like an attorney. Only answer the questions being asked. I teach a law and ethics class. You're looking at, think like a tailor. When you're looking at how do you tailor the message, it's much like going clothes shopping. Some things will look fabulous right off the rack. Some you need to just leave behind because that's as good as it's going to get. And others you take it to a tailor, a little nip, a little tuck. But the fact is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's what I'm suggesting here. Let's not reinvent the wheel just because we're leading in a remote location. If it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, still duck. So we're looking at making sure that you're going to connect with people and make it a personal experience, because we all know no one's going to remember what you say. And the cool thing about video is now we have that staying power that my students can see me, whether I recorded this at 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the morning, you can replay it over and over and over as long as the message doesn't change. And you can still have that ability to connect with someone, because no matter what you say, they don't always remember what you said. They always remember how you made them feel. And a lot of my students have that connection with me. They love to have that ability going, my gosh, Dr. C is a real person. I use videos. I have sizzle videos when I do my keynote speaking. I have speaking videos of the keynotes that I've done. You can see my speaker on when I was in Wrocław, Poland, and when I was in Vancouver, Washington, and when I was at Zappos in May, and all of stuff. And you can see what you're capable of, and to just see you in person. And then my students can go and connect with me that maybe in their announcements in their classroom or on a cell phone, I can make a video announcement, or I can do an audio announcement. Again, you have to know what's the most appropriate tool. Sometimes text and email is, but I just want to remind you, you've got to have that think like a tailor, think like an attorney, think like a radio announcer. Look at the end result. What's the goal? And then go back in your toolbox and find the most appropriate way to get there. It's called outcome-based thinking, because here's my favorite thing, and this is what I'll end with, is the idea of, think about Alice in Wonderland. We all know Alice, and I use her in my teaching all the time, that iconic story that Alice comes to a fork in the road, and the Cheshire Cat's sitting in a tree. And Alice is asking, well, which way do I go? And the Cheshire's answer, if you remember, is, if you don't know where you're going, any path will do. And so I offer you a humble explanation and sharing of some of my experience that leading in a remote location is simply any path will do. If we know where we want to end up, then let's lead them appropriately. And to make sure, I would never leave my house without GPS because I have a terrible sense of direction. But that tool, that communication tool, is how I lead myself to make sure that I put in directions so I get exactly where I want to go. The metaphor stands whether we're leading in person, whether we're leading in a remote location, or we're leading in any type of the hybrids that technology has. Just remember how the technology is used, and so we use the most appropriate way for the most appropriate outcome. I'm Dr. Cheryl Lentz. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I look forward to seeing you around the quad. Anything I can do to help, drcherylentz.com. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.